The market at Veth Crossing ran 18 hours a day, 6 days out of 7, and smelled like something between a livestock pen and a burning electrical panel. Caleb Marsh had been stationed at the edge of it for 4 months now, working a supply depot job that paid just enough to cover his bunk and his meals and nothing else. He was 31 years old, broad-shouldered from years of agricultural work back home, and deeply, fundamentally out of place in the Veth Crossing outer settlement, a city sprawl on the edge of the Seventh Reach that housed 11 species, 4 contested political factions, and somewhere north of 400,000 people who were all trying to get somewhere better than where they were. He fit in about as well as a boot in a bowl of soup. The market was the one place he didn't mind. It was loud and cramped, and everybody was too busy trying to survive to bother judging anyone else. He'd learned to navigate the stalls by color. The blue-canopied ones sold food, the red ones sold equipment, the yellow ones were medical. He'd learned which vendors would talk to him in standard and which ones would rather pretend he didn't exist. He'd learned that if you arrived in the last 2 hours before the morning bell, the blue canopy vendors would discount spoilage items, and that was where you got the best deal if you were a man living on a supply depot salary. He was doing exactly that, picking through a pile of reduced-rate protein blocks, comparing labels he could barely read, when he heard her. Not her voice first, her breathing. It was wrong, shallow, ragged at the edges, the kind of breathing a person does when they're trying very hard not to make noise while something inside them is pulling apart. He knew that breathing. He'd heard it from his father the winter the harvest failed, and from himself in the dark months after he'd left Earth on a transit visa and realized he had no particular idea what he was doing. He looked up. She was standing 4 stalls down, pressed against the rear edge of the blue canopy row, half hidden by a hanging display of packaged grain. She was tall, taller than him by a few inches, with skin the pale silver gray of old ash and hair that fell loose and white over one shoulder. Her ears came to tapered points at the top. Her eyes, when she turned them toward the vendor she was speaking to in a voice too low to carry, were amber, bright as lit copper. Irathi. He knew the species by sight. They were common enough in the outer settlements, humanoid, bipedal, usually from the Natra cluster systems, which had been contested territory for the last 6 years. A lot of them had ended up in places like Veth Crossing the same way he had, arrived on a transit visa and then just never left because leaving required credits they didn't have. What caught his attention wasn't her species, it was what was in her arms. She was holding a child. Small, too small for the age Caleb guessed it was, maybe 6 or 7 years old by Irathi standards, which would translate to 4 or 5 in human terms. The child's skin was the same silver gray, but it had gone waxy and dull, the way skin goes when something is wrong underneath it. The little girl's eyes were closed. Her head rested against the woman's shoulder with the particular boneless weight of someone who had stopped holding herself up. The vendor was shaking his head. He was a Hrath trader, barrel-chested, four-armed, not known for charity. The woman was showing him something in her free hand. Caleb was too far to see what. The vendor shook his head again, more firmly this time, and made a dismissive gesture with 2 of his arms. The woman's shoulders dropped. Not the slump of anger, the slump of a person who has just run out of options and knows it. She turned away from the vendor. Her eyes moved across the market with the methodical sweep of someone searching for anything that might still help, and they landed on Caleb. He had not moved. He was still standing there with a protein block in his hand, staring at her like an idiot. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the 4 stalls of noise and crowd. Then she came toward him. He put the protein block down. She stopped 2 feet from him. Up close, she was even taller than he'd clocked, and the child in her arms was heavier than it looked. He could see the tremor in her forearms from holding the weight for too long. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying, recently and privately, in that way people cry when they're too tired to do it with any drama. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I know," she said, in standard with a careful, deliberate accent, "what this looks like. I know what you will think." "Okay," Caleb said. She looked at him as if she hadn't expected that word, as if she'd been braced for something else. "My sister," she said. She shifted the child slightly in her arms and the little girl made no sound at all. "She has been without food for," she stopped, swallowed, "4 days. The food I had, she took it, all of it. She will not stop giving it back to me when I try to feed myself first. She is 6 years old and she does not understand that if I—" her voice cracked. She held it together with the sheer mechanical effort of someone who cannot afford to fall apart. "I have nothing left to trade. I have been to every vendor in this row." Caleb looked at the child, the waxy skin, the slack weight of her. "What does she need?" he asked. "Protein, any protein. And water, clean water, not the dispensary grade. Her kidneys are—" The woman stopped again. "I am sorry, you do not know me. I am asking a stranger, I should not." "How long has she been unconscious?" Caleb said. The woman blinked. "Since this morning." "That's not unconscious, that's collapsed," he said. "That's different, come on." She stared at him. "There's a medical station at the north end of the market," he said. "Yellow canopies, you probably already know. But I know the medic who's on rotation today, and she can run a panel without the intake fee if I vouch for you. Can you carry her that far? Do you need me to?" "I can carry her," the woman said sharply. Then softer, "I can carry her." "All right," Caleb said, "then let's go." He didn't ask her name until they were at the medical station, and the medic, a Thasari woman named Pren who owed Caleb a favor from an incident involving a misaddressed cargo shipment 6 weeks ago, had taken the child from the woman's arms and laid her on an exam platform and begun running equipment over her with practiced efficiency. The woman stood at the edge of the platform and watched with her hands clasped in front of her, white-knuckled. "I'm Caleb," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. She didn't look at him. "Saya." "The little one." "Miri." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. Pren worked. The readouts on the platform cycled through a language Caleb couldn't read, but he watched Saya's face instead and got the information he needed from there. The way her jaw unclenched fraction by fraction as the minutes passed, the way her breathing slowly deepened. "She is severely depleted but not critical," Pren said eventually, still not looking up from her panel. "Dehydration, protein deficiency, blood mineral drop, standard malnutrition profile. I've seen 100 of these this season." She said it without judgment. It was just a fact. "I'm going to run an IV line and give her 2 liters of nutrient solution. She'll need solid food when she wakes up, actual protein, not supplements, and she'll need to rest somewhere warm. Not the crossing dispensary," she added, which was also said without inflection but carried a clear meaning. The crossing dispensary was where people went when they had absolutely nothing else. It was not warm, it was not restful, it was a holding space. Saya was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Pren shrugged. "Thank him, he's the reason I'm not charging you the intake fee." Saya finally looked at Caleb. He looked back at her. "The intake fee is 40 credits, he said, "which I don't have either, so she was doing us both a favor. Don't read too much into it." Saya studied him. The amber eyes were careful, measuring, the way eyes get when a person has been disappointed enough times to check the math on anything that looks like kindness. "Why?" she said. "Why what?" "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know my sister. You have nothing to gain from this. Why?" Caleb thought about it. It wasn't a question he'd asked himself in the moment. He hadn't asked himself anything in the moment, he just moved. But standing here now, with her watching him like he was a calculation she hadn't figured out yet, he tried to put a word to it. "Because she's a kid," he said, "and she needed food. I don't need a better reason than that." Saya looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. not softening exactly, more like a realignment. As if she'd been holding her features in a certain set and the muscles had just quietly let go. She looked away, her jaw tightened again. "You should know," she said carefully, "what I was prepared to say to you at the market when I came to you. You don't have to tell me." "No," she said, "I want to." She was still watching Miri on the platform, watching the slow rise and fall of the child's chest. "I was going to offer myself as labor," as she paused, chose the word precisely. "Slave is the word, I think, in standard. I was going to offer to indenture myself in exchange for food for her. I have done it before in other circumstances. I know how to negotiate those terms." Her voice was flat, factual. "I came to you because you looked at me without contempt. Most vendors looked at me with contempt. You looked at me as if I was simply a problem to be solved. I thought, if I was going to offer that to anyone, I would rather offer it to someone who did not look at me with contempt." Caleb said nothing for a moment. "I'm not going to take that offer," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you, because you didn't take it." He looked at her profile, the white hair, the careful set of her mouth, the way she watched her sister breathe like it was the only thing tethering her to the room. "How long have you been in Veth Crossing?" he asked. 11 months. "Where did you come from?" The pause was long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Natra," she said, "specifically the third settlement on the Natra secondary chain, Keyleth Station." Another pause. "It's not there anymore." He didn't push. Miri woke up 2 hours later in stages, first a restless turning, then her eyes opening halfway, then a small confused sound that was not quite a word. Saya was at her side before the sound finished, leaning over the platform with one hand on the child's forehead, speaking in low, rapid Arathi that Caleb had no translation for but understood completely anyway. The child grabbed Saya's wrist with both small hands and held on. Caleb was sitting in a chair on the far side of the room, giving them space, looking at nothing in particular. He had been sitting there for approximately 40 minutes, which he knew because he'd been tracking it in the automatic, slightly dissociated way of someone who is not sure what else to do with themselves. The room had the particular quality of a space that had absorbed a lot of difficult things and learned to hold them without comment. The neutral pale walls, the soft medical lighting, the faint mechanical hum of equipment that did not care what you were feeling as long as it could measure it. He was not, he would have said if asked, a person given to reflection. He was a person given to doing the next thing. But in the stillness of the room, with Saya murmuring over her sister and the equipment cycling quietly, he found himself thinking about what she had said, what she had been prepared to offer him. Not with judgment. He understood desperation. He'd lived close enough to its edges to know what a person considers when the ordinary options are gone, but with something that felt like weight. The understanding of how close a thing had come to going differently. 23 people before him, some of them rude, one of them unkind, and then him with his protein block and his inability to think of a reason not to help. He didn't think of himself as a good person. He thought of himself as a reasonably functional person who tried to do what seemed obvious. But sitting here in this room, watching Saya hold her sister's hand with the careful grip of someone who has learned not to assume that what they're holding will still be there if they let go, he felt the particular gravity of what obvious had turned out to mean. Pren appeared at his elbow. "The nutrient solution will need to continue for another 4 hours, she said quietly. "And then she needs to eat real food." "I've already told the sister." "I'll get it," Caleb said. Pren gave him a look. "You said you don't have 40 credits." "I'm not buying it at the market," he said. "I have food at my bunk. It's not much, but it's real." Pren studied him for a moment. Her species didn't have the same facial expressions as humans, but Caleb had been at Veth Crossing long enough to read the Thasari equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "You live in Block 7, she said. "Yeah. That's a 40-minute walk." "I know where I live," he said. She let the moment sit. Then she said, "I'll watch them while you go." His bunk was a single room in a prefab block that housed 62 tenants and smelled of recycled air and other people's cooking. He had a shelf, a cot, a lockbox, and a small cooler that ran on the block's shared power grid. In the cooler, half a dozen real eggs he'd been rationing for 3 weeks, a packet of dried grain, a container of preserved protein paste that tasted like salted cardboard but had good numbers on the label, and a quarter wheel of something the vendor had called cheese, though its relationship to actual dairy was theoretical at best. He took all of it. He also took the emergency credit chip he kept in the back of the lockbox under a false panel, 40 credits, his actual emergency reserve, the thing he hadn't touched in 4 months because he kept telling himself he'd need it worse than this. He stood in his room holding the eggs and the grain and the protein paste and looking at the credit chip. Then he put the chip in his pocket and went back. Miri ate with the focused, serious intensity of a child who has learned not to trust that food will still be there if she slows down. She ate everything he put in front of her, and then looked at the empty container with an expression that was not quite hope and not quite a question. Saya, sitting beside her, said something in Arathi. Miri looked at Caleb. "She says," Saya said, "to tell you thank you. She has. She does not often speak standard yet. We have only been learning since we arrived." 11 months is pretty good going, Caleb said. Saya translated that. Miri considered it, then said something. "She asks," Saya said, "if you have any more of the—" She looked at the empty container. "She calls it the paste that tastes like sad. She says this is the best thing she has eaten in a long time and she would like more." Caleb looked at the child. The child looked back at him with amber eyes that were brighter now, the waxiness gone from her cheeks, and on her face was the particular expression of a small person making a very careful diplomatic request. "I don't have more right now," he said, "but I know where to get it." He used the credit chip that evening. He bought enough food to last a week, not the discount end-of-day items, actual proper stored food, and carried it back to the medical station in 2 bags that cut red marks into his palms, and he split it between his cooler and a space Pren grudgingly cleared in her station supply room. He didn't tell Saya about the credit chip. It wasn't her business. He'd spent his emergency reserve on an emergency. That seemed mathematically correct. They stayed at the medical station for 2 more days, because Miri needed rest and Pren needed to monitor her iron levels, and because Caleb gradually understood Saya had nowhere else to take her. The address they'd been registered at for the last 4 months had been a shared room in a settlement hostel that had closed 2 weeks ago when its operator was arrested for permit violations. They had been sleeping in the market since then, in the covered sections, where the vendors didn't sweep you out until close, and then in the service corridors behind the stalls. He learned this in pieces, not from Saya directly. She was not a person who volunteered information about her own suffering, but from small details that accumulated. The way she reacted to Pren offering a blanket as if it were an extraordinary gift. The practiced economy with which she moved, taking up as little space as possible, touching nothing she hadn't been given permission to touch. The way she woke up in the chair beside Miri's platform at 2 in the morning, when Caleb came back from a late shift, and was immediately, completely alert. The way people who have been sleeping in unsafe places learn to sleep. On the 3rd day, she said to him without preamble, while he was eating a protein block near the station's side door and watching the morning market begin to fill, "You have spent approximately 200 credits on us. In 3 days. "That's not," he started the denial reflexively, then stopped. "That's roughly right." "That is most of what a supply depot worker earns in 2 weeks, she said. "Close enough." "Why?" He'd been waiting for the question. "I told you, because Miri needed food." "She has food now," Saya said. "She has been fed for 3 days." "She could have been fed for 3 days with 50 credits. You spent 200. I also bought enough to last a while. Caleb. She said his name with careful precision, the way she said most things, like words were equipment she was learning to use correctly. I am not ungrateful. I am trying to understand you. You are not like I expected. What did you expect? She considered the question seriously. I expected transaction, she said. I have been in the Reach for 11 months. I have met many people. Most people in the outer settlements are trying to survive, which means they calculate everything. What can I get? What does it cost? Is this exchange worth making? She paused. You don't seem to calculate. I calculate, he said. I'm just bad at it. My numbers keep coming out weird. She looked at him. A small thing happened at the corner of her mouth, the beginning of something that was not quite a smile but was related to one, in the way that distant cousins are related. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. I have been trying to reach someone, she said. Since we arrived at Veth Crossing, my mother, she was separated from us when Keyleth Station she started again. She was put on a different evacuation transport. The records were lost in the administrative collapse after the Natra secondary chain was declared contested. There is a reunification registry, but it is, her jaw tightened. It is accessed through the Galactic Citizen Bureau. And the Citizen Bureau's Veth Crossing branch requires proof of registered residence to access the registry. We have no registered residents. We have not had one since the hostel closed. Caleb set down his protein block. And without a registered address, he said slowly, you can't access the registry. And without proof of registry access, I cannot establish residence, she said. Yes, the circle does not open. She said it without self-pity. Just the flatness of a person who has traced the same wall so many times they've stopped being surprised by where it ends. I have enough credits now, with what you've given me, to perhaps pay a fixer to access it unofficially. But fixers in the crossing take their payment up front and do not always. Don't use a fixer, Caleb said. She looked at him. The GCB branch manager is a Harloth woman named Designate Vess, he said. She comes through the supply depot twice a month. I know her. I've carried her shipments. He picked up his protein block again, looked at it, put it back down. I can't promise anything, but I can ask. Saya stared at him. You know the branch manager, she said. I carry her shipments, he said. That's different from knowing her, but she's been decent to me. She tips in extra protein bars. That's as close as I get to knowing someone in this city. Saya was quiet for a long moment. Caleb, she said. Yeah. I don't understand you, she said. Not as an accusation. More like a scientific observation. Like she was noting an anomaly she genuinely could not place. That's okay, he said. Most people don't. Designate Vess came through the depot 4 days later. She was tall even by Harloth standards, with the characteristic wide-set gray eyes of her species, and a manner that managed to be simultaneously formal and unhurried, the bearing of someone who has processed a great deal of bureaucracy and arrived at a comfortable relationship with it. Caleb caught her at the loading dock while her assistant was cataloging the delivery. He was direct about it. He explained Saya and Miri, the collapsed registry circle, the lost records, the Keyleth Station evacuation. He gave Vess the names. He did not dress it up or make it dramatic. He just told her what had happened and what was needed. Vess listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Natra secondary evacuees are a classified administrative mess. Half the records went down with the Keyleth infrastructure, and the other half are in a dispute between 3 jurisdictions about who has to pay to reconstruct them. I know, Caleb said, which is why they can't get in through the front door. Which is why you're asking me to open the back door, Vess said. He held her gaze. Yes. Another silence. Vess looked past him at the far end of the dock, where a cargo mover was cycling through its checklist with patient mechanical repetition. This is a gray area procedure, she said. I know. I would need documentation of the evacuation transport registration, whatever survives of it. Enough to establish their pre-Keyleth identity. Saya has her original transit documents from the evacuation. She's been carrying them on her since they left. Vess looked at him again. How long have they been in the crossing? 11 months. The Harloth equivalent of a sigh was a very small sound, almost inaudible. She looked past him at the far end of the dock, where a cargo mover was cycling through its checklist with patient mechanical repetition. You understand, she said carefully, that if I do this, I am doing it because the administrative failure is real and documented, and the regulation that prevents them from accessing the registry is a structural flaw in the resettlement code that 3 separate reform committees have flagged, and none of them have fixed. I am not doing it as a personal favor. Understood, he said. I am doing it, she continued, still looking at the far end of the dock, because there is a 6-year-old child who has been sleeping in a market service corridor for 2 weeks, and that is a failure of several systems simultaneously, and the only way to correct a failure of multiple systems is for someone with access to at least one of those systems to act. That's a very precise way to put it. I am a precise person, she said. She looked back at him. Bring them to my office, not the main branch, the small office behind the archives building Tuesday at the 4th hour. Tell no one else. Caleb nodded. Thank you, designate. Don't thank me, she said. Carry my shipment correctly, and we'll call it even. Tuesday, 4th hour. Caleb brought Saya and Miri to the small office behind the archives building, which was a narrow room that smelled of document sealant and organized authority. Miri wore her best clothes, which Caleb had gathered were the only clothes she had. She held Saya's hand and looked at everything with the careful attention of a child who has learned that new rooms can go either way. Designate Vess processed the documents without ceremony. She was efficient and professional, and she did not editorialize. She cross-referenced the transit records against a database that Caleb gathered was not the standard public one. She made 3 calls on a secured line. She generated forms, countersigned them, and stamped them with a seal that looked important. At the end of it, she looked at Saya across the desk and said, "You are now registered residents of Veth Crossing. Outer Settlement Class B. Your residency entitles you to access the Galactic Citizen Bureau Reunification Registry, Social Services Filing, and—" She paused, and something shifted in her expression. "There is a match in the system already. For your mother." The room went very quiet. Saya sat perfectly still. "Her name," Vess said, checking the screen, "is listed as Urin Saya, which I gather is a family designation," Saya said. Her voice was almost inaudible. "My mother's name with my name attached. It means it is an Arathi tradition when you register to search for a child. You take their name as your surname to show that you are the one looking for them." She stopped. Her hands were in her lap and she was gripping them together hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. "She has been registered how long?" Vess checked. 8 months. 8 months. Saya had been in Veth Crossing for 11. Her mother had been in the registry for 8 of those 11 months, looking for her, and she had been locked out of the registry by an address requirement she couldn't satisfy. Miri, who had been watching Saya's face with the alert, worried attention of a child who tracks an adult's emotional weather very carefully, said something quiet in Arathi. Saya answered her, without looking away from the screen. "She wants to know," Saya said, and her voice was doing something complicated, "if our mother found us, or if we found her." Vess was quiet. Caleb said both happened. The call was made that afternoon through the Bureau's secure comm system. It lasted 11 minutes, and Caleb did not stay for it. He walked Miri down to the small courtyard outside the archives building, and sat on a low wall with her while she asked him questions in halting standard about the plants in the border planters, and he answered them as best he could, which was not very well, because he didn't know what anything on this planet was called. That one, Miri said, pointing to a low blue-leafed thing with serrated edges. Caleb said, I have no idea. Miri considered this. You don't know? Nope. She looked at him sideways. You are not very smart, she said, in the careful, slightly formal standard of someone translating their own native directness into a second language. That's fair, he said. She looked at the plant again. In Arathi it is called Velsha. It means, she thought, it means the plant that comes back. Because it grows after bad things happen, fires, floods, it is always the first one back. He looked at the Velsha. That's a good name, he said. Miri nodded solemnly. Then she leaned sideways and very quietly put her head against his arm, and they sat there in the courtyard in the thin afternoon light, until Saya came out of the building with red-rimmed eyes and a different set to her face. Not relief exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has been holding up a very large weight for a very long time and has just been told that help is coming. Caleb went back to work the next morning. He had a depot shift at the 6th hour and a delivery manifest that wasn't going to sort itself. He was 3 weeks behind on his bunk fee, and he had no emergency reserve left, and his food situation was technically fine but thinner than he'd like. None of this was a catastrophe. It was just where he was. He was halfway through the manifest when Saya arrived at the depot. He stared at her. She was standing at the exterior door, which was technically a restricted access entrance, looking in at him with that careful measuring expression. How did you get in here? He said. The access panel is the same model as the hostel we stayed at, she said. The code sequence is usually a default factory pattern unless the site manager has changed it, and your site manager has not changed it. She paused. You should tell them. Yeah, he said. How long did it take you to figure that out? 8 seconds. He stared at her. I used to work system security, she said, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to mention while standing in a doorway she had hacked her way through. At Keyleth Station before she stepped inside, I wanted to speak with you. He put down the manifest. Okay. She stood in front of him and she was doing it again. That careful assembly of words, like she was building something precise and didn't want to get the measurements wrong. My mother's transport is 3 weeks out, she said. She is on a resettlement ship from the Oreth Junction. When she arrives, we will have 3 people, which means we can apply for family settlement status, which unlocks a different tier of housing access. She paused. I have been thinking about what comes next. I have been thinking about it since Tuesday. Good thinking, Caleb said. I have skills, she said. System security, network architecture, transit logistics. These are things people need in the outer settlements. She stopped. I had stopped thinking about them as things I could use. I had been here 11 months, and I had been so focused on surviving that I forgot I knew things, because knowing things does not matter when you cannot access the systems to use them. Right, he said. I have been to 3 employers this morning, she said. Before coming here, I have interviews scheduled with 2 of them next week. The 3rd offered me a conditional position starting in 4 days, pending residence verification, which I now have. He looked at her. In 4 days, he said. Yes. That was fast. I am very good at what I do, she said simply. There was no arrogance in it. It was just a fact, stated with the same quiet precision she applied to everything else. That's great, he said. Saya, that's really. I also wanted to tell you something else, she said. He waited. She was looking at a point somewhere around the level of his collarbone. Then she looked up, and the amber eyes were direct and clear. I came to you in the market, she said, prepared to offer you something that I have never offered anyone willingly. You didn't take it. I told you that was why I was telling you, and that was true, but it was not everything. She took a breath. The full truth is that I went to 23 people before I came to you. Vendors, station workers, a constable post, a resettlement office. Some of them were rude. Most of them were simply busy. One of them, her jaw tightened, then released. One of them was not kind about it. And then I came to you and you looked at me and said, "Come on," as if it were the easiest thing in the world, as if my sister and I were a problem that obviously needed solving and obviously you were going to help solve it. He didn't say anything. "I have been in many places since Keyleth," she said. "I have met many people. I know what it looks like when someone helps because they want something back. You have consistently, over many days, helped and received nothing and not seemed to notice that you were receiving nothing." She paused. That is not common. I want you to know that I have noticed it." "I got protein bars," he said, "from Designate Vess." Saya looked at him. "She tipped me in protein bars," he said, "so technically I received something." The thing at the corner of Saya's mouth happened again, bigger this time. It was a smile, an actual one. It changed her face completely, opened something up in it that had been closed and careful before. It lasted only a moment before she pulled it back, but he'd seen it. "You are very strange," she said. "So I've been told." "No," she said. "I don't mean it as," she shook her head slightly. "I mean it as something good. I don't have the right word in standard. In Arathi there is a word, Veleth. It means someone who is good in a way that doesn't make sense, who gives without calculating. We say it about, it is usually said of," she paused. "It is usually said of someone you trust. Someone you would walk with." He held that word for a moment, Veleth. "Miri says you don't know what Velsha is," Saya said. "Miri is correct," he said. "She also says," Saya continued, "and I am translating faithfully, that you are not very smart but you have a kind face and she has decided she likes you." "High praise," Caleb said. "From Miri, yes," Saya said. "She does not like most people, she is selective." She said the word with a private warmth, the warmth of someone talking about a person they love very specifically. She has asked me several times since Tuesday when she will see you again." Caleb looked at the door she had hacked her way through. "I'm here most mornings," he said. "Depot shift 6th hour, the access code is," he stopped. "Actually, you already know the access code." "I do," she said. "Then the answer to Miri's question," he said, "is whenever she wants." Saya looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, a precise, deliberate nod, the kind that means something more than just agreement. "Whenever she wants," she said, "I will tell her." 3 weeks moved differently after that. They had a rhythm to them that Caleb hadn't expected. Miri came by the depot on most mornings that Caleb was on shift, initially with Saya and then, after a week, sometimes alone. With Saya's knowledge, he gathered, because she always seemed to know exactly how long the walk took and when Caleb's break was. She had learned the route the way children learn routes, which is completely and permanently, every landmark noted and filed. She would arrive at the door, enter the code, he'd given it to her officially now, and find Caleb at whatever he was doing and sit nearby and do her own things, which mostly consisted of working through a language program on a borrowed tablet, and occasionally asking him questions that had no obvious connection to each other, but were clearly part of some internal curriculum she was running for herself. What is the fastest way from here to the market's north corner? If a person wanted to learn network architecture, what would they start with? In your culture, what do you do when someone has been good to you and you cannot yet give them anything back? That last one he thought about for a moment. "You just tell them," he said. "I mean there's no formal thing, you just say it." Miri nodded seriously. Then she said, "Then, thank you for my sister and for me." She would say it herself, but she searched for the word. She is practicing how to say it correctly. She does not want to say it wrong. He looked at this small person sitting across from him, 6 years old and precise as a compass, who had spent 4 days hungry without telling her sister. She was giving her food back because She was 6 years old and her job, as she understood it, was to make sure Saya was okay. "Tell her she doesn't have to practice," he said. "She can just say it." Miri looked at him with ancient eyes. "You don't know Saya very well yet," she said. He laughed. He hadn't laughed like that in months, a real one sudden surprised out of him. Miri looked pleased with herself. Saya's new job was with a transit logistics firm that needed someone who could read and repair their network routing systems, which were, apparently, in considerable disarray. She threw herself into it with a focus that was almost mechanical. Caleb gathered this from Miri's reports, which were detailed and slightly editorial. She is fixing many things that the previous people broke because they didn't understand how it works. She is not angry about it, but she is making a face. "What kind of face?" Miri made a face. "Yeah," Caleb said, "that's a pretty clear face." He saw Saya in the evenings occasionally. They had gotten into the habit of eating near the market when their schedules crossed, which was not planned. It had just started happening. She would find the best discount items with unsettling precision, and he would carry them, and they would eat at one of the standing tables near the north gate, while Miri narrated observations about the other people at the market that were simultaneously accurate and uncharitable. These were not meals that were planned. They were meals that happened because they were both going to eat anyway, and the market was between her work and his depot, and Miri had apparently decided that this was the arrangement now, and neither of them had told her otherwise. He noticed things in these evenings. The way Saya relaxed around Miri in a way she didn't anywhere else, the particular loosening of her posture, the shift in her voice from precise to something warmer. The way she listened when he talked, with the same focused quality she brought to everything, like whatever he was saying deserved to be heard correctly. The way she laughed, rarely, not easily, but when it came it was sudden and completely unguarded, as if she'd forgotten to be careful for a moment, and those moments were his favorite things in the market. He noticed the way she asked questions, too. Saya asked questions like a surgeon worked, precise, targeted, nothing wasted. She asked about Earth with the genuine curiosity of someone who had grown up on stories about it but never expected to be speaking to someone who had come from there. She asked about his family, about the farm, about what it looked like when a harvest failed and what people did after. She asked without drama, without the performance of sympathy, just the clean interest of someone who wanted to understand a thing correctly. He found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone in Veth Crossing. About the year his father had stood at the edge of the north field and not moved for a long time, just looked at it. About the way his mother made tea with condensed milk and refused to do it any other way because her own mother had done it that way. About the morning he'd signed the transit visa paperwork at a processing office in a city he'd taken a 3-hour bus to reach, and how the officer behind the desk had stamped his papers without looking at him, and he'd walked out into the street and thought, "Now what?" "You were afraid," Saya said one evening, not as a question. "I was terrified," he said. "Still am most days, I just kept going anyway." She considered that. "In Arathi," she said, "there is a saying, roughly it translates as, courage is not the absence of fear, it is taking the next step when your feet have stopped cooperating." She paused. "My grandmother used to say it. I thought it was a comfort saying, something adults say to children so they feel better. I did not think it was a practical description." Another pause. "I have revised my position." "When?" She looked at the market stalls going dim in the evening light. "When I walked toward you," she said. "In the market. My feet had mostly stopped cooperating. I took the next step anyway." He thought about that for a while. "I'm glad you did," he said. She didn't say anything. But she stopped looking at the market stalls and looked at him instead. And the amber of her eyes in the evening light was a color he was pretty sure he was going to spend a long time remembering. He noticed other things too. The way she'd gotten into the habit of making sure he had food on the evening she arrived and he'd forgotten to eat. The way she'd started reading the manifests at the depot and restructuring them into a more logical order, not because he'd asked, but because they were disorganized and it bothered her. The way she looked at him sometimes, still calculating, still precise, but with something else under it that he was learning to read. One evening, standing at the north gate while the market shut down around them, and Miri had fallen asleep on a bench with her head on Saya's folded jacket, Saya said, "My mother's ship made dock 2 days early. She will be here in 5 days." "That's good," he said. Yes, she was watching Miri sleep. She will want to meet you, my mother. She will have questions." "What kind of questions?" Saya looked at him. "The kind a mother asks," she said, "about a person who appears frequently in her daughter's communications." He processed that. "Miri has been telling her about me," he said. "At length," Saya said, "and in detail. My mother now knows your name, your occupation, the fact that you do not know what Velsha is, and that you laughed at something Miri said about the market vendors." A pause. "She has said in her last message that she wants to thank you personally, and that any person who makes Miri laugh is someone she is glad to know." I'd like to meet her too," he said. Saya was quiet for a moment. The market was winding down around them, the vendors packing up, the light going amber and low. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. When I offered myself to you at the market, 11 months at the market that morning," she paused. "I have thought about it many times since. Not because I regret," she stopped, recalibrated. "I have thought about it because I wonder what would have happened if you were a different person, if you had agreed. If I had traded that for food for Miri, what would I have become?" She looked down at her sister's sleeping face. "I think it would have made me into something I couldn't have come back from. At that point, I had already given up many things. I think that one would have been the last thing." He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "You didn't take it," she said. "And you said come on as if it were simple, and because of that, because of one person who said come on," she stopped. Her jaw worked. "We found our mother," she said. "Miri is gaining weight. I have a job, we have a registered address. We have a future here, I think." "A real one." She looked at him. "All of that happened because you said come on." "I said come on," he said. "And also Pren did the medical work, and designate Vess bent the procedure, and you went to 3 employers in one morning and got 2 interviews and a conditional offer. I think you did the harder part." "I did those things," she said, "because I had a place to rest, and food, and someone who," she stopped again. This time the pause was different, not a search for words but a decision about them. She looked at him with the amber eyes, very steady and clear. "I am not practiced at this," she said. "I am practiced at surviving. I am not practiced at this other thing." "What other thing?" he said, though he thought he knew. "Trusting someone," she said. "Wanting someone," she stopped, precise as always, getting the measurement right. I would like to continue this, whatever this is. I do not have a clear word for it in Standard. In Arathi I would call it," she thought for a moment. "I would call it Velathrani, the walking together of Velith people, 2 people who give without calculating, who find each other." He looked at her. The market was almost quiet now. The lights had shifted to the low amber of closing hour. Miri slept on, unbothered, one hand still curled around the edge of Saya's jacket. "I'd like that," he said, "the Velathrani." Saya looked at him for a long moment. Then that smile came, not small this time, not pulled back, full and sudden and completely unguarded, the one that changed her whole face. "Your pronunciation," she said, "is terrible." "I know. I will teach you." "Okay." She looked back at Miri. He looked at the market lights. Somewhere across the crossing, on a resettlement ship 5 days out from dock, a woman named Saya was coming home to her daughters. In 3 weeks, Saya would be given a full-time contract. In a month, they would move out of the temporary housing and into a family unit on the east side of the settlement. Caleb would help carry boxes. Miri would direct him where to put things with the authority of a small general, and he would do it wrong twice before she showed him the correct method. These things hadn't happened yet, but they were coming. And Caleb Marsh, sitting in the amber light of a market at the edge of the seventh reach, a man who had come to a strange world with no particular plan and no emergency reserve left and no idea what Velsha was, felt them coming the way you feel a season changing, not in any one thing but in everything at once, the whole air shifting. He had done nothing heroic. He had carried some food. He had called in a favor. He had stood at a loading dock and asked for something gray area. He had said, "Come on." It turned out that sometimes that was the thing. Not a battle, not a sacrifice, not a calculated risk. Just a person who looked at another person and said, "Obviously this needs solving, and obviously I'm going to help solve it, and obviously we're going to walk over there together right now." Humanity had done a lot of things across the reach that it was less than proud of. Colonized territory without asking. Run transit schemes that enriched the home planets at the expense of the outer ones. Produced its share of people who did the math on suffering and decided it wasn't their problem. But it had also produced Caleb Marsh, who was terrible at math and kept coming up with weird numbers and didn't know what Velsha was. And in the end, in the specific arithmetic of one market morning, that had been exactly enough. "You are thinking about something," Saya said, not looking at him. "Yeah." "What?" He considered. "I was thinking," he said, "that I should learn more Irathi before your mother arrives." Saya looked at him. Something soft and warm moved through the amber eyes. "Yes," she said. "You should." She glanced at Miri, checked that she was still deeply asleep. Then she turned toward him just slightly, and in a voice that was even and careful and carrying something underneath it that he was beginning to learn to hear, "We can start now if you like." The market lights hummed. The crossing settled into its nighttime quiet. Somewhere above them, through the settlement's filtered ceiling, the stars of the seventh reach were doing whatever stars do in the dark, burning without calculating, spending their light on everything equally, not stopping to ask if anyone was looking. 5 days later, Caleb stood at the docking platform at the edge of the crossing's transit hub, slightly to the left and slightly behind Saya, in the position of a person who understands that this moment is not his and is glad to be a background figure in it. Miri stood in the front, both hands clasped in front of her, very still, with the peculiar controlled quality of someone who is containing something enormous. The resettlement ship was an Orath-class vessel, broad and functional, not built for beauty but built to last, the kind of ship that moves thousands of displaced people across the reach because the reach has been displacing people for years and will go on doing it. It docked without ceremony. The boarding ramps extended. The first passengers began to come through. Caleb watched Miri's face. He saw the moment it happened, not in sound, not in movement, just in Miri's face, which went from contained to undone in a single instant, every bit of 6-year-old dignity giving way to 6-year-old realness, and she made a sound that was half her mother's name and half nothing at all and ran. The woman coming through the gate, silver-gray skin, white hair, amber eyes brighter than her daughter's by a shade, was already running too. They collided somewhere in the middle of the platform, and it was not graceful. It was a tangle of arms and muffled sounds, and the kind of crying that has nothing in it of performance and everything in it of people who have been apart too long. Saya walked forward. Caleb stayed where he was. He watched her walk into it, into the embrace, into the crying, into the collapsed distance of 11 months and 8 months of registry entries, and everything that had been held apart for too long. He watched her mother's arms go around both daughters at once, around Saya and Miri together, and saw all three of them stand there in the middle of the transit platform while people moved around them, ordinary and miraculous at once. He stood with his hands in his pockets and thought about Keyleth Station, which wasn't there anymore, and the evacuations that had scattered people across the reach like seeds into wind, some of them finding soil and some of them still tumbling. He thought about his own mother back on Earth, who sent him messages on a 6-week delay and ended every one of them the same way. Just let me know you're all right. He was all right. He was more than all right, standing here at the edge of a reunion that had cost him 200 credits and a favor, and the time it took to carry 2 bags of food, which was an absurdly small price for the thing he was currently looking at. Eventually Saya looked up, found him across the platform. She said something to her mother. Caleb saw the older woman look in his direction. He gave a small, awkward wave, which was an objectively ridiculous thing to do, but the only thing he had available. The older woman's face, Urin, did something complex and warm. She said something to Saya. Saya said something back. Miri, who had apparently heard the exchange, turned and yelled across the platform in English that was so clear and deliberate it was obviously been rehearsed. She says to come here. You don't have to stand there like a lost cargo. Caleb laughed. He walked across the platform. Urin looked at him when he arrived. She was shorter than Saya by a few inches, with the same careful amber eyes, but where Saya's precision had an edge to it, Urin's was softer, worn smooth by something. By years, maybe, or by loss, or by the particular tenderness that comes from loving people very much and having them taken away and getting them back. She said something in Arathi. Saya said she stopped. She was working on keeping her voice even and not entirely succeeding. She says, I know everything that you did. I know that you carried my daughters when I could not be there to carry them. I do not have the words in your language to tell you what that means to me, but I will spend a long time trying to find them. Caleb looked at this woman who had traveled across the reach on a resettlement ship looking for her children, who had put her own name in a registry for 8 months, while the administrative circle refused to open, who had sat on a slow ship for weeks knowing they were there, and not knowing if they were all right. He thought about what to say. He said they carried each other. I just got the door open. Saya translated. Urin listened. Her eyes went bright. Then she reached out and took his hand in both of hers. The Arathi greeting, Saya had told him, between people who are not strangers anymore, and held it for a moment. He understood it. Miri, who had been waiting with barely contained impatience, said, Also, he doesn't know what Velsha is. I am teaching him. He is slow, but he is trying. Urin looked at Miri, then at Caleb, then at Saya. Saya, for the second time in his acquaintance with her, smiled the full, unguarded smile, the one that changed everything about her face, the one that opened the thing she kept so carefully closed. And Caleb Marsh, formerly of Earth, currently of Veth crossing outer settlement, a man with no emergency reserve and an empty cooler and 200 credits less than he'd started with, stood on the transit platform in the light of a system he hadn't grown up under, and was, for possibly the first time in his adult life, exactly where he was supposed to be. The Velsha grows back, Miri had said. After bad things happen, fires, floods, it is always the first one back. He looked at the 3 of them, Urin and Saya and Miri, tangled together in the middle of the platform, the reunion still settling around them like something solid being built, and he thought, yes, that's about right. The first one back.